Hello everyone, it's Oliver Harper here. For this podcast discussion, I am joined by fellow YouTuber Ashens and Twitch streamer Macaw45 to explore licensed video games, focusing on movies that had video game adaptations on the old 8-bit micro home computers to modern day consoles. This podcast was recorded a few months back for my film club show that is produced for my patrons. I have now made it available for everyone to enjoy. So sit back and relax and listen to our tales of playing some of the best and worst movie tie-in games from our youth. So Stuart, what were the first sort of licensed video games you encountered growing up, and what were your initial impressions of them?
Well, the first ones I came across would have been on the ZX Spectrum, really back in the day, like December 1986 onwards, basically. And they always had this kind of sheen of quality to them. It was always like, oh, we've spent a lot of money on this movie license, put all the good programmers and the good musicians and the good graphics guys on it, and you would end up with something a little bit sort of above the standard of general games, often with sort of every different level was like a different gameplay style and things like that in order to really sort of stretch it out. And that lasted for years, really on the 8-bits, until sort of the end of that period. They were all kind of, a movie game was in its way a high quality one as a general rule. Then as we sort of went into the 16-bits, not so much. They kind of, in the early days, when there was crossover between the two, yes, fine. I mean, the Robocop game's great. The Batman, the movie game is great on everything. But then, yeah, things started to drop a bit. And I mean, by the time we'd moved on to PCs and the sort of latter-day consoles, yeah, the whole movie game thing tended to be, well, this is going to be crap shovelware, as opposed to actually a decent game. So it's been very odd over the years to see it go from, oh wow man, a movie game, amazing, to, oh shit, a movie game? Oh no. Yeah.
Well, as a kid, I, like many other people I suspect, I did play a Batman. I guess that's the first one that really sticks out to me. I believe it's probably the first one I came across as a kid, just playing Batman on the NES, which is of course a pretty solid game, pretty amazing. But it doesn't really resemble the movie very much. It's kind of just does its own thing. Japanese developed side scroller. It's high quality for what it is. But it's good, and I guess I didn't really think of games as movie games until I was a little bit older, because I was very young then. And with my Super Nintendo, the game that I got with my Super Nintendo was, of course, Last Action Hero. And the game is crap. It's pretty bad. I did finish it. I finished the damn thing because, I mean, when you're a kid, that's all you got. But and then from that point on, I was probably always just, always suspecting movie games of being a little bit off the stray path, so to speak. Because, I mean, Last Action Hero is really just absurd. It's a bit of an absurd game, but yeah, after that, I don't really know. I never really seeked out movie games to buy. It was only when I started, especially when I started streaming and all that, playing more games in general. As I got older and started getting back into the old consoles again, then I started finding all the other movie games and seeing what was good and what wasn't, and actually noticing quite a few good games in the rough there. So it's kind of interesting.
I've just remembered what the very first licensed game from a movie I would have played was. It was A View to a Kill on the ZX Spectrum. And it's absolutely awful. Really awful. Because the whole thing of James Bond is, it's all dynamic and he's exciting and cool. And in A View to a Kill game, you can literally trip over a cigarette lighter and he's unconscious for 10 minutes. Absolutely awful.
There was one level, isn't there, in A View to a Kill? I think we got to escape and get down the lift shaft or something like that. There was I remember because I reviewed the film, and I recall sort of flicking through some of the gameplay stuff and trying to have a go at the game, but it was just I think was it one of those Domark titles.
Yes, it absolutely was. It's split into 3 parts. Part 1, you're supposed to be driving a car around to catch Mayday as she comes down in a parachute, but it's actually just a maze game where you're chasing a giant pillow. It's absolutely awful. The second one, you're supposed to be getting out of a burning building, and you're just walking so slow, but the closer the fire gets to you, the slower Bond walks. So you end up with this farcically slow. It's taking him like a minute to cross the entire room, and he keeps stopping and like going, ooh, and rubbing his hand across his brow. And the third one is the platform game. It's insane. The third level is unbelievable, where you're supposed to be doing all the sort of lift shaft stuff. And you trip over tiny items. And when you fall, he like spins 360 degrees at incredible speeds. You know, just like he does in the films. So, man, I've not thought of that game for years. Now I just wish I hadn't.
So what year was that game? Because I guess it's also interesting, like, what was actually the first movie license game? Because there was that on Spectrum, there was that Blade Runner game where they didn't get the license, so it's based off the soundtrack or something.
Yes,
that's right.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
I don't know what year that came out.
Star Wars was 82, wasn't it?
Oh, the arcade game.
But then but in terms of like a licensed movie, it's around that time. But before then, you had Spider-Man and Superman on the Atari 2600, but they weren't based on movies, though, were they? So I was trying to think. Yeah, possibly. It either could be something like Star Wars ET or maybe perhaps Krull. Around that time.
It's got to be an arcade game, probably, isn't it? Could be 2600. But
Tron.
That's a good shout.
All the early arcade games, yeah.
My experience was somewhat similar to Macaw's because I played things like Batman, Ghostbusters 2, and Gremlins 2 on the NES, which, weirdly, the NES, from my experience of movie licensed titles, were somewhat... There were movies that were accessible to children still, but if you look at stuff on the 8-bit micros, there were kind of movies that were aimed at adults. You had like Robocop and Total Recall, you had Raw Deal. No, Red Heat, sorry, not Raw Deal.
I was going to say, Raw Heat game. I'm quitting this podcast, I need to play this now.
Rambo and so forth. So it was, because I was desperately wanted a computer games machine, you know. My parents weren't going to buy me an NES because I recall my friends' parents being so annoyed at the cost of these video games because they got Ninja Turtles or Hero Turtles for us UK folk when it came out, and it was like £50 or less, and £50 or whatever back in 1991 whatever was, I don't know, maybe £500 today or something in their eyes. So I got a Commodore 64, which was kind of really at the end of its run, but I got the Terminator 2 pack. So you've got the Commodore 64 with Terminator 2. It's got a great cover. It's got like the, Arnie on his bike and his beam of light coming out of this computer behind him. I quite like T2 on the C64. I know you chaps have played the Amiga version because there's so many, like T2 and then later on Alien 3 and Batman Returns. I suppose even the first Batman film had multiple kind of versions of this game, of games based on the movie, all kind of varying degrees of sort of cosmetic differences and styles of game, but that was kind of my window into sort of playing the latest movie on a computer, and but I later sort of discovered things like Robocop and Rambo through just basically getting second-hand copies of these games through my friends, because my friends, their older brothers, were sort of shifting off their games collection because they were moving on to Mega Drives, and I was getting all this Commodore 64 stuff, and I was somewhat quite impressed with these games, but the level of quality was always up and down. In particular, Robocop on the C64, where it would, you couldn't finish the game; it was bugged, which made it really frustrating to sort of complete it when you go on your friend's house and play it on the Amiga, and it's kind of somewhat like the arcade when it could be completed.
I can't believe they released that when you can't finish it. That time bug, right? The timer.
Yeah, I know. It's madness.
Amazing.
Madness.
Isn't there a thing where if you cheat and give yourself the time, the level's not in the game anyway? It's just a load of corruption or something. It's like, how did they get away with this? I don't...
And it got reviewed like high scores when it came out, so I find it baffling that no one actually bothered to sort of see how far they could get. It's really weird.
9 out of 10 must buy.
Yeah. Hey Stuart, did did you somewhat kind of gravitate towards more of the sort of movie tie-in games than say an original title when you were younger, or did you sort of by that point seem to sort of realise that the movie licensed games weren't all what they was kind of sold as, or especially in the magazines where they like praise it heavily, and suddenly you play it and it's a bit hit and miss?
I mean, in the early days, purely because of the sort of effort that went into them, you were always excited about a movie game. But you've got that extra layer of you were excited about the film too, and it's something you could never go to the cinema and see. It's like Robocop. When you're 12, you're not going to be sneaking in to see that, are you? So it's like, oh, I hope my uncle rents this on VHS. When it's finally out in 3 years' time, I get to watch it. But in the meantime, I can play the game, I'm trying to think of sort of ones I played at the time which were just good examples. So, I'll tell you what, Cobra on the Spectrum, based on the Stallone film. Really good game, very difficult, and nothing to do with the film whatsoever, almost, other than sort of weird lip service to a couple of the bits. But it confused the hell out of me because you pick up weapons in the game by picking up a hamburger. You get a hamburger, you get a new gun. So I thought in my head as a child, in the film, at some point he's going to find a gun hidden in a hamburger. And when I eventually watched the film on VHS, I was like, every 5 minutes, he's going to get a gun out of a hamburger in a minute. He never does, of course, because that's not what happens in the film. But we had this weird sort of limbo where we would have the game and have played through the game, and it was a good year or something before the film came out. I think Robocop 3 is the heaviest example, where it was out like several years before the film was now.
It's about in terms, the Amiga got it. I suppose if you look at it in terms of release date, where you were in the world. So in the UK, we got Robocop 3 around, I think it was around 94. So the game was already out in the Amiga in 1991, the end of 91. So the SNES version came out like 92. So I was still, like probably you guys as well, going, where the hell's the film? It's just like Robocop 3 is, we're not actually going to make a film, we're just going to release it as a video game, So yeah.
And it was quite faithful, wasn't it?
The Robocop 3 on the Amiga at least is such an ambitious game that the developers didn't really mind the license at all. They thought it was going to be big, I guess, but not that you can say the same for the Super Nintendo game, but that's a different story.
That's the ridiculously difficult one, isn't it?
Macaw, you are somewhat of a fan of the SNES version. Is that correct?
I have to admit, I have received quite a lot of enjoyment from fighting a gigantic robot demon in the second stage. Takes up half the screen. I actually
not even animated. It just jumps,
that's
doesn't it?
right.
Jumps up and down.
Kind of, yeah. But I do kind of like. I think the artwork in the game is quite good. A lot of the backgrounds are quite good. The general atmosphere with just that art and the music, the soundscape, like the first stage in the streets, it's got this like very sort of dark music theme. I quite enjoy that, and probably that reason alone is why I played till the end. But yeah, it's a very rushed sort of game.
They were a bit annoyed because they didn't want to do an original game. They wanted to essentially convert an arcade game, which there was no arcade game.
Yeah.
So just basically just repeated what we saw in the first video game Ocean Software did. But with Robocop 3 on the Amiga, incredibly ambitious, as you were saying, and it shows you at the time that they probably thought this was going to be a big deal, Robocop 3. But despite Robocop 2 that was released on the NES, the Amiga, everything around that time was kind of praised for its graphics, but gameplay wise it was still something that was nothing original.
Yeah, and all those like non-arcade Robocop 2s are their own thing, whereas the arcade Robocop 2 that was developed by Data East, just like the original Robocop on arcade, there was no ports of that. It was just arcade exclusive, and it's a pretty cool game.
That was really good, really faithful. And I didn't know, because I knew Stuart, because you said to me that the Japanese one had a whole new opening that's different to the US version, where you actually you have a sort of recap of the first movie.
Yeah,
that's a really cool scene.
I don't know why they took that out. It's such a shame. It's a great way to start the game.
I think it must have to do with just wanting to cut down playtime for revenue, because it's kind of just all fluff, I guess, at the beginning.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Take their credits away. Make money faster.
Yeah. Don't let them have fun. We want their coins. Yeah.
Yeah, only in the Japanese version.
You've reminded me of Robocop 2. I had an Atari ST at the time. My friend had an Amiga, and we both got Robocop 2, and they are so different. I remember looking at his and being really sort of jealous until I played it, and I think actually the ST version is probably more fun, but the Amiga version is a lot more impressive visually.
Yeah,
It has all the explosive sound effects and has a weird hover pad, which I hate.
Yes. Yes.
I've only seen videos of that, but when I was comparing the versions of that game, it's bizarre how they're all kind of really similar, but they're all a little bit different. Like, the graphics are all different. There's the Amiga one with the giant sprites, then there's the Atari ST one, which is a little bit more normal looking. It's not so in your face, but is arguably the better looking game overall at the end of the day. Well, not that I've played through them because I don't know the stage design, but they're all bizarrely similar, but yet not. And then there's the Amstrad GX, whatever it's called, that console. There's that unique version of the game as well. I don't know how many Robocop 2 versions there are. There's quite a lot. There's a Commodore one that's totally different. Commodore C64 one, I should say. NES, there's a different one again.
And Game Boy as well. It's crazy how many different they basically develop two different games, and then they just get ported to use different machines, and there's slight variations here and there. And throughout, obviously coming to the 90s, we see that, I suppose, taken to the next step with some of the games being so radically different. In the case of things like Jurassic Park, every port was different.
Yeah.
Stuart, was there a particular sort of game that stood out in the 1980s on the 8-bit micros that was clearly the best movie license game, and what would you say is probably the worst of that decade?
Ooh. So, the best, you're looking at one of the ocean ones for that. Robocop is probably going to be the answer to that, actually. Just because the levels are so well designed, it's so tight. It's the only version I know of where Robocop can't jump. It really annoys me when Robocop jumps. He weighs like 40 tons and he's made out of titanium. He can't jump. He has a hover pad.
In the NES game, he can't jump. That's another side scroller where you can't jump.
Oh, I didn't know that. Right, 10 points for the NES version, definitely. Yeah, and Robocop, when it was released, was like in the ZX Spectrum fucking, what was it called? The Gallup charts, the charts of sales. It was in there for like years, one of the best-selling games. The Batman, the movie game, is great. I prefer the 16-bit versions, though, because the driving sequences are like far, far superior. Untouchables was pretty good. I remember it being slightly overly difficult in an early level. I couldn't get past like level 2 or something, but if I cheated and got past it, I could do the rest of the game easily, which is, I don't know, maybe just me being rubbish, but it was an interesting game as well, because every level was sort of a bit different to anything I'd played before at the time. Again, one of these sort of every level is a different game kind of thing. When you're looking at the really bad ones, that's a lot of the early ones, really. A View to a Kill is definitely up there with games that are just no fun to play for me. It was just like, well, let's just shoehorn the closest thing we can get to the plot into a game and put it out, and yeah, that'll do, guys. Everybody likes a stick man that's supposed to be James Bond.
When it comes to 8-bit, I'm yet to really sink my teeth into playing Spectrum games and such. Have played plenty of some Commodore 64 games here and there. I did play the Commodore 64 Cobra, and I believe the Amstrad version as well. For the most part, it would probably be NES that I've played movie games of. As much as I want to play Spectrum Death Wish 3, which still which still hasn't come to fruition, but that along with Big Trouble in Little China, and they're only on the old 8-bits, again, all the Batman games, of course, are very good. Well, there's 2 on the NES. Both of them are Sunsoft. The second Batman game on the NES, it's kind of one of those weird sequels to a movie games that came out. There's
Return of the Joker, isn't it?
Yeah, Return of the Joker is kind of like a sequel game, a sequel to the movie game, which is weird, but you'd see that actually crop up quite a few other times, like
Jurassic Park did it.
Jurassic Park 2, yeah, The Chaos Continues on Super Nintendo that plays like Contra or something. And then there's the Riddick game that came out in the 2000s. And then after that, I guess there's Ghostbusters, the video game, 2009. That's kind of a weird niche of like sequels to movie games. But yeah, those two. I also played Dirty Harry on the NES, which is shockingly terrible. It's basically unplayable. Like, you cannot play this game normally unless you really dedicate time to it. And I did dedicate time to it, and I finished it, and I did enjoy parts of it. It's an interesting game, but oh my god, like, it is pretty shocking if you see that game.
As a kid, I really enjoyed Batman on the C64. I know I had experienced the Amiga version, but I found the driving section and the Batwing sequence too difficult to control. I just found it a bit of a nightmare. Yeah. So it was kind of easier playing the sort of isometric version with the car and the Batwing. And there seems to be kind of less villains to attack in the C64 one. It seems easier to play than all the others. And I played Navy SEALs. That was really good. I had a cartridge version of that on the C64. The graphics were really impressive for the time. This was quite a late release as well. And I recall seeing bits of the movie on like Sky Movies advertised movie premiere, and I was just like, "What the hell is this?" And obviously had Michael Bean in it and Charlie Sheen.
I actually just saw that movie yesterday.
Did you? Oh my god! Is it any good? 'Cause I've not properly seen the film. Is it any good?
It's not good. But you can get enjoyment from it. I thoroughly enjoyed the soundtrack. The movie itself it's incredibly silly. It almost plays out like a recruiting tool just for the American military or something. It's sort of just like they go on a mission, then there's a little. It's almost like a video game. They go on a mission. There's a cutscene where they talk to each other, paper thin characters, and then there's another stage, and then there's another cutscene. And by the end of it, you don't care about any of the characters. You don't care about the villain. But for the sheer silliness, there is some enjoyment to be had. I can say that. It's got a good soundtrack.
We had Navy SEALs on the Amiga, and it was only about 3 years ago I discovered it was based on a film. I'd never heard of the film somehow, so it couldn't have been that heavily promoted at the time.
It's a weird thing, isn't it, with Ocean Software sort of buying, optioning licenses to make games based on these movies, where they just grab anything, often by the case of just the title alone, I'd imagine, or they kind of read an early script and gone, oh, this sounds like it would be a great video game. And the film often doesn't quite, the game often doesn't quite hit with the audience because they're often unaware of the movie, to a certain degree. Because actually another video game I played, I really enjoyed as a kid, was Aliens on the C64. There's two versions, wasn't there? There's one developed by an American company, one developed by a UK company. The one I played was the kind of sort of first person sort of view, and you can switch between the characters. I thought that was really good, and as a kid I was quite scared because you hear the beep beep and you see the alien just walk on casually, and he walks towards you. It's like, oh fuck, just keep pressing the fire button trying to kill it. I thought that was very clever. But yeah, I suppose the disappointing games of that period was probably Total Recall was a bit rubbish on the specky. I recall being disappointed with that, and Highlander as well, which I love the movie. I adore it for all its faults as well. But the Spectrum game, I think the specky version.
Oh, that's a much better example of like the worst movie license game on the Spectrum. That's much worse than A View to a Kill, yeah. Because it's just an absolute mess. Everything runs at 1,000 miles an hour. Somebody waves his arms about, somebody's head drops off. Well done. Game over. It's terrible.
It sounds like I need to play this game.
Oh, it's yeah. It has to be experienced.
That actually reminds me, there is another 8-bit game which I'm quite a fan of, which is only stuff that I've played since I became an adult, but the 80s Japanese PC stuff, which is a whole different world to the other 80s IBM computers or Commodore 64 or Spectrum or any of that. The Japanese had their NEC computers mostly with with the PC-88 series, but then there was also ASCII, or I guess it is, with the MSX, which I guess some people would know as being the Metal Gear system that had Metal Gear 1 and 2 on it. But there was actually a whole bunch of Rambo games that came out of Japan in the 80s. There was, I think, 3 of them produced by Pack-In Video before they did a 4th one, which is the NES game, which got released outside Japan. But the others are kind of these weird action RPGs. They're like these top-down action RPG sort of style games, somewhat styled over after Hydlide. Hydlide was a really popular game in Japan. This was many years before the NES version that everyone makes fun of. But Hydlide in 1984 made a huge impression in Japan, and then these Rambo games are kind of just Rambo versions of Hydlide to a degree. And there's one on the PC-88, which is the second one that they made, called Super Rambo, which I'm a big fan of. that's I remembered that. It's actually kind of like a proto Metal Gear 1. You can crawl, there's like stealth, there's all your weapons. It's a very interesting game.
Really?
Yeah.
So I presume these ones are kind of based off Rambo 2, is that right?
All of them are Rambo 2. They're all based on Rambo 2. All 4 games, the 4th being the NES one, yeah.
Stuart, did you see a sort of big improvement in these licensed games come the 16-bit era, or did the games kind of stay the same with their gameplay, and it was only the graphics that we saw an improvement?
Yeah, there's this weird thing with the licensed games where, like, the more power they had to the computer, the less effort they put in, it feels like. Because, I mean, on the Spectrum, you were like, I mean, you had your bad stuff. You had your Highlander, and you had your View to a Kill, and to a lesser extent, the Running Man was a bit shite. Predator, that's pretty awful. But most of them, you know, if you've got your license, you've got a lot of effort put in. Then by the end of the Amiga's life, my God, you got absolute crap, like the Amiga Last Action Hero. Dreadful, absolutely dreadful. The Amiga Dracula, the Amiga Akira, I think all of those came out in like the space of a month. Cliffhanger may have been there as well.
Oh,
yes.
God, Cliffhanger.
Yeah, what a month to be an Amiga movie fan, you know? I'm just going to go and spend like £150 on some of the worst games ever released, you know? And then as it went on for the consoles, it really felt like shovelware, didn't it? I mean, you've got absolute pap, like Fight Club on the Xbox and Charlie's Angels on the GameCube, and it's all just, we've got a license, slap it on a basic game engine, make one of the models look a bit like Cameron Diaz, there we are, just fire it out, job's done. I think for me though, the sort of tipping point in my mind was that Terminator 2 game for the Amiga, because it had all the trappings of one of the old, every level's a cool different type of game, except every level's shite, you know, with the possible exception of the like puzzle sliding block puzzles, which are simple, but at least they work. The level where Arnie walks along shooting the SWAT members, A, looks nothing like the movie, and B, is so devoid of any fun. I can't believe they actually, you know, put that on a disc and stuck it out there. It's astonishing.
It's weird, isn't it? Because that whole level is like, it's during the day, or like sunset.
Yeah.
It's like,
there's like the fence or brick wall in the background or something like that.
Yeah, literally just a brick wall. He just wanders along.
Yeah, he's wandered onto the cartoon Pigeon Street. You know, it's very weird. You know, it's because the C64 one like has different color grading completely, so it seems to fit more in line with the kind of movie in that regard. But the Amiga one, it's even Arnold doesn't even look like Arnold, even though they've got the face of him in the game in the bottom left, where he gets hit, he just turns into T800 or whatever. But he's got weird buzz cut hair as they've animated him. It's most peculiar, and it's, you know, a massive film that year, and Ocean have really sort of cut corners completely on it. It's baffling.
We have to mention, of course, that it was Commodore's big, this is going to be the big game to push our Commodore 64 GS console, the Commodore 64 without a keyboard, and then eventually they released Terminator 2 on a cartridge, and at the last minute stick like a Music Maker program on there, and you have to press a button to select which game you want at the start. So you can never play it on a Commodore 64 GS because there's no keyboard to select the game. It's just absolutely...
Yes, I had that cartridge, but obviously because it was a regular C64, I could switch between the two. But the Music Maker was fantastic. I figured out how to sort of compose some music. You could unlock some sort of like a demo mode. When I remember when I was younger, we had like music class. We get all the keyboards out, and everyone just presses demo on the keyboard, and the music teacher's like, stop doing that. It was like...
Terminator 2 is your entry into the world of music. There you go.
yeah, there you go, man. Yeah. It's
every piece of music Oliver composes. Do.
But the Amiga version of T2, they even fuck up like the main theme. It's like the dun 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 dun. It's completely out of step. It's so bad. It's so bad.
I want to say that I've only briefly played that game, but in order to try to come up with something good to say about it, you could say that the graphics artists at least had enthusiasm making the graphics, because there are aspects to it that are impressive, but then there's also the fact that it plays terribly. They look nothing like the movie versions. The characters look really just goofy. They come off like just looking really strange, but at the same time, there's kind of some impressive pixel art and animation. It's bizarre, but it's terrible.
The animations are great. Yeah, I think that's the nicest thing we can say. Everything has loads of frames, nice and smooth for non-Arnie fighting non-Robert Patrick.
Do you guys think that because of these movie license titles were, they somewhat looked like 16-bit games, the gameplay was just really kind of falling on its arse in many of these titles? Do you think the gamers in particular saw the Mega Drive or Super Nintendo versions of these movie titles and thought, wow, these are a lot better. I'm gonna ditch these kind of microcomputers or 16-bit Amigas.
Well, providing they didn't see Last Action Hero on the Super Nintendo, of course.
True.
The Amiga version's even worse, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. It probably is.
Arnie just headbutts thin air, doesn't he? Just headbutting everything.
It looks every direction and every move looks like he's doing a weird dance. It was amazing on that front.
What I referred to earlier with the sort of multi-format releases, in particular 16-bit era was where we saw so many variations. In particular things like Jurassic Park, Batman Returns, and T2, because T2 would have an arcade release that was ported, and then it's a bizarre kind of platformy version, which Macaw, you've played through, I think on the Super Nintendo or perhaps the Mega Drive for your...
The Super Nintendo version, yeah. Well, everyone struggles with that game when it comes to those bloody bike scenes. They're terrible. If they weren't in the game, it would be so much better. I find that it's not a particularly good game, and it's a very hard game to tell people to play because most people won't find it fun because there's not much fun about it. But which is not the best endorsement for a video game. But I am fascinated with that game because it's just it follows the movie so closely, and you even you even get Sarah and John, you have to give them commands and they follow you, and all this kind of stuff is absolutely fascinating. And all the different weapons, they've even got a stage in there of the part where they go in the middle of nowhere and get the weapon stash in the underground or whatever, the bunker. There's even a stage where that happens. It's fascinating from that point of view. But then they put those damn bike scenes in it, connecting every level, which are terrible. And yeah, it's kind of awkward in general. So yeah, but it's a fascinating game.
I didn't get into consoles properly until sort of the death of the Amiga, so to speak. So I think that a Sega Saturn was the first console I had that was actually a thing at the time, as opposed to something I'd bought second-hand, cheap, that was hideously out of date. So my memory of that kind of period are things like, seeing Dennis coming out on the Amiga based on the film with Walter Matthau in, and but why is this a thing? Who wants to play this? It's got a really good Walter Matthau face in it. That's all you can say about that game.
The first time I played the Super Nintendo version of that game, I shit myself when Walter Matthau appeared on the screen out of nowhere. And it's so sudden and he's so huge. I was just like, oh.
The Walter Matthau jump scare game we didn't know we needed. Oh, God.
Well, Stuart, had you experienced Alien 3 on the Amiga? Because that was another title very much that had multiple sort of versions released across the platforms.
Yes, absolutely. Because my friend who had a copy, his cousin did the graphics for it, a man called Lee Ames. So we were like, please be good, so we don't have to pretend. But yeah, it was good, so it's all fine. And the graphics are great. Well done, Lee. But yeah, that's a fun game. Sort of enjoyed the running around that. I wish there was a bit more variety in it. Everything kind of looks mostly the same in it as you go through it, but. And the pipe bombs, when you launch them, it takes like 5 hours for them to start shooting forward. That always annoys me, but one of the better games. The Alien games, and Aliens games, depending how you want to put it, did fairly well on the old home computers, actually. I remember the Spectrum version of Aliens being sort of quite claustrophobic and creepy. Yeah, I think that was one of the better franchises, for the conversions at least.
And you had experience with the Atari St Aliens, which a lot of people might not know about, would you?
Yeah, entirely true. So that's a public domain game, isn't it? Written by some bloke in his bedroom, yeah.
I remember I was streaming that, and I was like, there's this Aliens game on the ST that no one knows about. And then I remember you appeared and said, I got that when it came out. I was like, what?
Yeah, absolutely. So I saw it reviewed in Amiga Format magazine. ST Format, of course it would be a bloody ST game. ST Format at the time, and just thought, that looks cool as hell. And had to wait ages until I could, because you don't have any money at that sort of age, to be able to order it from a public domain library where you just basically paid the cost of the disc and a little bit on top. And yeah, it's a really nice little tight turn-based strategy game. And it's got lots of audio clips and digitised pictures from the film and stuff in. I mean, it's very rough and ready and the graphics aren't up to much, but as it was literally written probably by a teenager who just really liked Aliens, I remember sort of quite enjoying it. And I went back to it sort of about a year or so ago, and actually it's pretty good. I honestly thought I'd play it now and go, oh god, this is awful. But there's just something... It's just so tight. Just, you're on the left-hand side of the screen, get to the APC on the right. There's aliens in the way. Go. But, yeah, I do like a turn-based game, and it's just something quite fun and quick about it. Very impressive for a time when public domain games weren't necessarily that great.
Alien games and Batman, Robocop and Terminator all seem to sort of do quite well during this sort of 8-bit and 16-bit period. Because as you were saying, you played Alien 3 on the Amiga. I had the Mega Drive version, which I loved. It was really fast and action-packed. Obviously, a little bit repetitive. But then when I got to Super Nintendo and played the SNES version of Alien 3, I was really wowed by the graphics. And it felt like a scarier game in that regard as well. And you had all these missions to it. But it was so bloody long. Really hard to sort of... at a young age, to sort of put the time into it and get to the end without having to resort to cheating, But it was, there was other games I kind of missed out and played later on, which was like Judge Dredd on the SNES. I thought was surprisingly quite good, because I recall people saying it's a bit rubbish, but it's like half of it's the movie and the other half is like the comic book. And then there was like Stargate around this time, which I did. They all seem to have the same engine. So they some all played the same and were really well animated, but Stargate I thought was a bit of a clunker because your character turns around really slowly. I suppose it's overly animated in that regard. And True Lies I've tried to play so many times. I can get like to the third level and then you get lost really quickly. It's just such a endless maze of like each level. Like 3 or 4 of the levels have nothing to do with the movie.
Such an amazingly long game. Like, it really it's very good. Like, the engine is great. The graphics are cool. The core combat, especially like the shotgun, the machine gun, and all that, the pistol, they all feel really fun to use. But the game just goes on and on, stage after stage after stage after stage. And I mean, to its credit, it's not like it's repeating tile sets. There is like a lot of different areas, but it definitely probably wears out its welcome. But it's hard to just straight up say it's bad. It's kind of one of those weird ones. You have to be in the mood to play it.
I mean, Ocean Software were obviously known for most of the licensed titles on the micro home computers and eventually the consoles. But do you guys think there was any other companies out there that really sort of gave them good competition, you know? And what were your feelings on Ocean Software? Do they often fail or deliver?
Well, it's that old thing again of they used to deliver in the early days, then they delivered something around the time of the Amiga and that later on, but it wasn't as good by any stretch, you know. It was the old thing, Ocean have got the movie license, great, this is going to be amazing. And then, yeah, I mean, I don't actually know who released the sort of really bad latter-day Amiga ones. Maybe it wasn't Ocean, but my sort of respect for them fell through the floor and straight through to the Earth's core after Terminator 2 on the Amiga, frankly. So, yeah, that was the end of that for me. But...
Well, as a kid, I definitely didn't pay enough attention. I was too young, especially in the heyday of Ocean, to really pay much notice. I mean, as a kid, I was subjected a little bit to Robocop 3, although I didn't finish it, the Super Nintendo one, although I didn't finish it until I was an adult. Really going back and playing the Ocean Batman, 1989 Batman game on the Amiga, like, that was super impressive. Stuff like that, like the Robocops, of course, some really good versions of Robocop. Ocean has sort of always been fascinating to me for that reason, and really legitimately good with a lot of those early releases, like you guys say. I believe their first big hit was Daley Thompson's something, like, wasn't
Daley
it?
Thompson's Decathlon,
Yeah, like, I believe that really was their starting point before the movies even, and they're all supposed to be pretty good. So in regards to Ocean, I definitely kind of have a spot for them these days.
Do you think Sunsoft probably did a better job than Ocean?
This really touches upon the whole culture difference here. Well, maybe not culture difference, but there was a massive difference in the maturity of video games when it came to Japan and the West, really, when it came specifically not with RPGs and stuff, because I mean America had been going hard with the PC RPGs and they're at the forefront of that for the longest time. But when it came to these 2D action games, these arcadey style games, of course the Robocop arcade game was Data East, which is Japanese, but it was really Japan that was leading in that regard. They're always doing the tight games with played well, like Castlevania and that type of thing. And they always translated that type of stuff into the console games. So Sunsoft with the Batman games, even Konami, of course, did some of their own Batman games. They did the Final Fight clone on Super Nintendo with Batman Returns, which is a super good game. It really ties into that a little bit. So the Japanese stuff, you always know I mean, not in every instance, obviously, but there's always a style to the Japanese games where you know it's going to be solid. It's probably going to be solid, like, in that regard. But when it came to a lot of these European games and whatnot, it's really all over the place, and some were good, like previously mentioned Batman on the Amiga. Untouchables, again, very impressive game with how it pulls off its stuff in the 1989, I believe that game was, 88, yeah. 89. Yeah. So pretty early and pretty impressive on the Amiga there. But then you had stuff like, you know, like Beverly Hills Cop and all this other terrible game.
God, I'd forgotten about that.
So it's really that's kind of what's really interesting to me, ever since just really getting into the whole world of video games and what country games are from and stuff. Like, when it comes to the European stuff, it's just all over the place. Like, I'm doing a motion with my hand right now going up and down. It's just like crazy. Whereas, say, the Japanese stuff, it's more just like there's an average there. There's a solid average. But that's kind of what makes the European stuff so fun to try out and investigate, really.
Did you guys find that games that were based on movies that didn't really stay close to the plot and created their own story fared better than the ones that stuck close to the film's original, storyline?
I'm not sure it had that much of a bearing on the quality ultimately, because you've got things like Robocop, which fits very tightly to the film, which is great. And then you've got things like The Running Man, which is quite tight to the film, and that's bloody awful. Sometimes you'd get sort of weird little bits that they've just added that have nothing to do with the film, like the Ghostbusters game. We were so into Ghostbusters, we played this loads of C64 Spectrum. Half of the game is just driving down an infinitely long straight road, sucking up ghosts with a vacuum cleaner, and that is very much not in the game, or the film even. But not the greatest. It's really down to how these people interpret it, isn't it? Are they looking at things and going, right, this is what happens in the game, this is how we can make something fun out of this, or just, this is what happens in the game, we must replicate it exactly, even if it's no fun?
I think that if you can give Sam Neill a machine gun and have him shoot T-Rexes, that's inherently probably more fun than sticking close to the source material. So, but... But again, it does depend on what they're doing with the game. Like, for example, if they were to make, which I'm actually surprised it didn't happen, but if they were to make a point-and-click adventure game on DOS based on Jurassic Park, then it would have been a different story. But if you're going to do a side-scroller, then sure, why not have a machine gun stuff? And that same philosophy, I guess, you could take in all the other games, really. So, yeah, it really just depends what they're going for and what they're doing, really.
They did a point-and-click style game, I believe, on the Mega CD, I think, for Jurassic Park.
Oh, did they?
Which had this kind it's animated kind of sequences, and you click on the screen.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
It may give you flashbacks to sort of things like Myst to a certain degree, which...
Because the immediate ones that come to mind when it comes to like point-and-click games based on movies is there's one on DOS for Batman Returns. There's also the Wayne's World game.
Oh my god!
Yeah, there's a Wayne's World point-and-click adventure game on DOS, which I don't know how it is quality-wise. I haven't played through it if it's annoying or fun, but the pixel art's amazing. It's got really good pixel art, so it's kind of interesting.
There's a peculiar sort of Ghostbusters 2 game on DOS as well.
Yeah, like that company also did the Die Hard DOS game, which is unique as well. Yeah, they were really ambitious. They had a couple years there where they made games like that before they got, I think, absorbed into Sierra, and they just became a development team for Sierra. But yeah, Ghostbusters, like Ghostbusters 2 on DOS, it's really impressive and it is fun until you get to that damn Statue of Liberty stage and you can't control the damn thing, and you literally can barely control it. You got one life. I could never get to Vigo at the end. It always disappointed me. I still need to try to finish it.
You got to do it. I mean, are there some titles, guys, that you felt got a bad rap at the time, especially during the 16-bit era, that are actually pretty decent?
I'm trying to think. The problem is, things did tend to get quite inflated in the review scores back then. It's a game and it works. 73% minimum, you know. Especially if it's a major publisher who might pull their advertising if it's not very good. I'm trying to think of ones that I played that just weren't very good. Well, that bloody Ghostbusters game is the perfect example of that. Played it over and over, and really there's not much to it at all. Very basic sort of management and driving down infinitely long straight road simulator. You know, just like the film. We played the Gremlins. There was a text adventure of Gremlins on the Spectrum, and we got obsessed with trying to get further in it, but I just remember it being very difficult. It could be that we were too young trying to play it, but like, you'd turn it on and Spike throws a dart through your eye in the first room, and that's it. And we were trying to sort of wander around, solve the puzzles, and just never got our heads around it at all. So maybe that's the one we played for long. But if that's actually a good game or well received or not, I have no idea. But it wasn't any fun, and we kept at it. And that's what it's like when you're a kid and you don't have many games, though, isn't it? You just play what you've got, because what else have you got?
Yeah.
Definitely in the earlier days, I wasn't looking at magazines as much, but when we got into the PS1 era and all that, PS1, Nintendo 64, that's when I was actually buying and reading magazines, and like was touched on before, that whole period is really where it became kind of a apocalypse of terrible license games, especially the PS1. Just these games where it's like a third-person action adventure in some generic engine, and it's just terrible. And that kind of went into the handheld side as well. Like the majority of the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance libraries, are very much just licensed games. Like so many licensed games, it's mind-boggling. I can't really think of any that had completely terrible review scores, but then I thought they were good because the stuff that was good, like Riddick, which was a little bit later than that period, like the PS2 onwards era, that got good reviews. When I was a teenager, I bought the Braveheart game on PC, which I think many people probably don't know exists.
Never heard of it. No, never heard of it.
Do you know about Lords of the Realm on DOS or Windows? There's one. That type of game, like a strategy, like a strategy war game, essentially. It's like that. It's really complicated. It's like that. It's terrible because the combat's completely broken. And that. But the thing is, that got terrible review scores. So unfortunately, I can't think of any instance where I could say.
I suppose I could rephrase the question as sort of hidden gems from that period, because there's games that I forgot about and played later on. I remember, I suppose at the time, not being able to afford some of them, but I really enjoyed like Demolition Man on the Mega Drive, because I thought it was during that period where most of the game reviewers were saying, oh, just another licensed game, it's another platformer, it's just unoriginal, it's boring, blah blah blah. And Demolition Man was really good. It kind of it sticks very closely to the movie. It's great kind of fast-paced action.
Yeah, I only played through that recently, and I was really surprised at how amazing. Like, I was legitimately amazing in parts. It was a really fun game to play through if you're in a side-scroller.
Yeah. And then there's Dragon the Bruce Lee story I really enjoyed, despite because it came out during that. So I think around the time was Super Street Fighter 2, so everyone's kind of used to that fighting game mechanic, and then also the same with Mortal Kombat, which is slightly different with its kind of combos and attacking methods. But Dragon was like a completely different beast altogether. But once you sort of figured out how to sort of fight and jump on people's chests and then build your chi up and unlock your nunchucks, it was such a good laugh. So that was fun. I remember my friend getting that on the Atari Jaguar, and it was just like that's like the Mega Drive game, but with slightly bigger backgrounds. The ceilings were really high. That was about it. What about you, Stuart? Have you sort of discovered any hidden gems from the past that you think, oh my god, I totally forgot about that game?
There were a few I played back in the game, really enjoyed. Rambo on the Spectrum, or First Blood Part 2, looked like a Commando knockoff, but was actually like a sort of four-way flick screeny thing. That was quite good fun. A lot of variety in the weapons as well. It's probably Cobra for the Spectrum, which got like rave reviews at the time, but nobody ever mentions. Maybe because it's so weird and basically has nothing to do with the film particularly. But it's one of these really sort of fast-paced games. Everything moves really smoothly. The colours work quite well, which is a rarity for the Spectrum. I remember just having immense fun with that. It's something you would only play for a short period, but you'd keep coming back to it.
Macaw, now you discovered a hidden gem, didn't you, on the Atari ST?
Masters of the Universe, of course, the Atari ST version. No Amiga version, just the only 16-bit one is Atari ST. Is Atari ST 16-bit? Well, I'm guessing it is.
Yes, yeah.
It is?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, that because I was always interested in the other versions, the 8-bit versions of that game when I was just looking through movie games, and I thought they looked cool. But I kind of watched videos of playthroughs very quickly, like very short game, obviously, and I thought it was cool, but it's not like amazing. Now, a lot of people won't necessarily find the Atari ST one amazing, so to speak, but I was just so impressed when I played through it because there was nothing that I could find, no playthroughs or anything of that game, and I played through it. And not only did they add did they redraw everything, obviously for 16-bit graphics, but it actually has a lot more content in it. They added a bunch more fights in it of characters from the movie. So there's like Beast Man and someone else in the junkyard that you fight. There's all these amazing sort of just animations in that first person sequence where you're like sort of like Operation Wolf or something. The animations in general, just compared to the 8-bit versions, are just like they really went all out with it. And most importantly, you get the damn sword at the end when you fight Skeletor. Because you don't get the sword in the other versions, but the Atari ST one has a big set piece where you fight him and then you unlock the sword and you have to run back and grab the sword and he holds it up and all this stuff. It's good.
Because I had the C64 version, which I really enjoyed, but yeah, I was disappointed you couldn't use the sword at the end. It did have the theme tune from the movie in it, and at the beginning it has He-Man outside Grayskull. I think it's like a digitized voice. It just goes, and it goes, And the thing comes down and goes diddle-a-da, diddle-a-da, and basically the He-Man movie theme is just a rip-off of Superman. But as a kid I was like, wow, that's amazing. So I was quite impressed with that, because you guys are both touched upon the sort of 32-bit era, because at the beginning of that sort of next phase of consoles we had quite a few movie licensed games that weren't awful. But as we saw this progression with things like The Mummy and Blade and Batman and Robin, which was an absolute stinker, it was incredibly ambitious. I recall reading that the developers paid so much for the license, didn't have enough money left to make a sort of solid video game. But if you look at it in screenshots, it looks amazing. But when you start playing it, it's like, oh my god, what is this? But at the beginning of the PlayStation and I suppose Sega Saturn time was we had Alien Trilogy. The Alien films were kind of back again with this kind of new version. Which was obviously then there was Hard Trilogy as well, where kind of everything was kind of separated into different films. Where Alien Trilogy, it kind of meshed everything together, and it was just had no kind of story. I mean, it had little cutscenes from the movie, and it tried to sort of string all these three films together. I was quite impressive at the time. The graphics were really good. The music was incredible, even though it wasn't using any of the music from the films. It was its own kind of original score. And that's kind of always stuck with me, that music. Every time you hear it, you think, oh, that's Alien Trilogy. But also we had Street Fighter, the movie game on the PlayStation Saturn, which was it was fine because it had the same engine as Super Turbo. But it played so slowly and the animation was so choppy. Because I'd experienced the arcade version at Alton Towers, I think the year before, something like that, and because I had Super Turbo on the 3DO, so I kind of knew how to do all the super moves. So when I started playing it, I was just like, I was wowed by it at first because the graphics looked amazing. For this, it looked better than Mortal Kombat 3, I thought. And playing as Van Damme, a video game where you're playing as Van Damme. I mean, I played Universal Soldier on the Mega Drive, which was a pile of shit, which was.
Isn't that just Turrican?
Yes. It's Turrican 2 or whatever, but I played that. And this new version on the Mega Drive, Universal Soldier, was this kind of muddy looking game with like a Dolph Lundgren who was like the size of a skyscraper trying to kill you. So playing this movie arcade was kind of mind-blowing, and I did all the special moves and stuff, and these bunch of kids that kind of crowded around me. That's my time to be in, to be sort of somewhat popular for 10 minutes on playing this game. And when I got my Sega Saturn, because I didn't jump onto the PlayStation bandwagon, I wasn't a sellout, you see.
I was as soon as I started playing the game, so I was like, I bought the wrong one. Quickly to the shops.
I support the winners, man. Yeah. But obviously I failed miserably. But yeah, I was a bit disappointed with the movie adaptation on the consoles because it didn't have the animation. But a lot of people prefer that version.
I don't know, man. I mean, I bought that back in the day in its ridiculously easily broken jewel case, and when I first started playing it, I selected Sawada, the character who's only in the film, isn't he? And then did his super move, which involves him raising his arms in the air and sliding across the screen with no frames of animation whatsoever. It's like
smell my armpits.
Exactly. It's like, I've not bought a good game here, have I? This has not got the effort put into it the arcade version had. Oh my god! But it probably does play better ultimately. I don't know. That's a difficult one. That.
I don't have much experience with that game, actually, the movie Street Fighter.
We've got to play it then.
I do.
If you're stream.
The bizarre...
It's movie related.
The bizarre thing is, I want to say there's actually 2 movie Street Fighter games, because the other one is some kind of weird Japanese-only thing that's based on the anime film. Yeah, I don't know what that is. I've seen like one screenshot of it. I think I've seen a screenshot where that guy with the robotic... the cyborg guy or something's like in it as a...
Yeah.
I don't know. You know more than me.
There's an FMV style game, so you're basically watching sections of the movie and you've got to click on the characters to sort of, for your cyborg to learn information about them, right? It's completely like...
So it's crap.
It's utter crap. And then you get to the end and it's literally Super Turbo where you're a robot fighting Ryu at the end.
Oh, that's probably what I've seen a screenshot of.
Yeah, it's got a few deleted scenes from like stuff that didn't make it into the final cut of the feature film, but it's an oddity. And I think it was going to get released over here, but I think Virgin Interactive kind of saw it and went, this is rubbish, we're not going to bother porting it. so it comes Japanese exclusive. So yeah, it's kind of weird game. But Macaw, did you kind of experience Alien Trilogy on the PlayStation? Were you kind of wowed by these early 32-bit titles?
I actually think I only saw that game with the PC version, but it wasn't originally a PC game. I believe the PS1 version, it was the development version for that game, and then I just have very little experience with the DOS, the DOS version. And from what I could gather, it's very impressive. It's like fun to shoot stuff, but I've heard that it just every stage is kind of the same after a while, and you have to fight 3 queens for each movie or something. It's sort of like every movie is the same set of stages almost, but not exactly the same, but just more of the same. Which, I mean, I guess if it's fun, some people like that. Maybe I'll check it out one day more in detail.
Well, one movie had that sort of crossover from the 16-bit to 32-bit, and that was Batman Forever, which I hated on the Mega Drive. I played it on the SNES at one point. It had load times. I thought it was really baffling. I was really baffled by that. Why was there load times on a cartridge? I think it's down to the compression or something like that. It had to sort of had to load. But the Mortal Kombat style combat to the game, and then it made the leap to the Sega Saturn and PlayStation with that crazy side-scrolling beat 'em up, which is utter bonkers, but surprisingly a lot of fun to play.
Just completely insane, where everyone's like changing sizes, and I don't know what they were thinking when they were bloody making that game, but it's entertaining. It's entertaining, I could say that. Like, geez, it's like you pick up, like, you're picking up items every second. They're all doing these different bizarre things, like making holograms of you, and it's just anyone that hasn't seen that Batman Forever arcade game really needs to see a video of that, because it's not really describable beyond a video of that game.
It's a weird 90s like nightmare, and everyone's running around like they're on ice. Yeah. And because Stuart, you've got a sizable Sega Saturn collection. You must have Batman Forever, right?
Do you know it's one of the few games I don't have, Batman Forever. I've still not got hold of a copy of that. Never even played the Saturn version as yet. Sounds like I've got to, because it's mental. But
it's bonkers, mate. We'll have to play that one day. That'd be great. Because there was also another movie license game which was derided by all critics when it came out. It sold so badly on a Sega Saturn, and that was Dragonheart. Now, Dragonheart. Now, I've played a bit of that, and it's not very good. But somebody in this conversation here really likes the game.
You could say,
and done really well and completed the fucking thing. But Macaw, so explain to us, why do you like this game? Because everyone else hates it. I think you're the only person in the world who enjoys this game.
Yeah, I played the PS1 version. It's very similar, I guess, to Mortal Kombat Mythology's Sub-Zero. So it's the same kind of thing with the weird digitized characters side-scroller. The thing that stuck, it is a clunky game. It's bloody clunky. It's really, you got to get used to a lot of things with it if you're going to get enjoyment out of it. If you do stick with it, it leads to really crazy content that I wasn't expecting. Like, the game has this insane assortment of boss characters you fight through. It's not just the one dragon or anything like that. Like, you fight the Sean Connery dragon at the beginning, but then it goes on into this craziness of fighting like stone golems and wizards and all about a whole bunch of different dragons, which are all really cool. Like, there's all these gigantic, crazy, it's actually got pretty decent designs on a lot of this stuff. And then once you get through all that stuff, which is already pretty impressive in itself, just for seeing how much, it's kind of like the developers were taking the piss by that point. It's like, well, we got nothing really to work on with the movie. Let's just add 1 million dragons and all these fantasy creatures, and we're just going to make this crazy-ass side-scroller. So they did that. But then when you get into the final part of the game, it suddenly has nothing but human bosses, these big dudes with swords and all this kind of thing. And everyone that you kill has this unbelievable fatality animation, which is incredibly violent. I don't know, the movie is like a family movie, but the game has just absurd amounts of violence that only start appearing about 3/4 of the way through the game, which is completely... I'm just like, wait, did they not test this? Like, did they sneak this through? So it becomes this crazy Mortal Kombat style thing where there's just non-stop sort of violence and fatalities with all these characters, like really over the top stuff that was just like mind-boggling. And then you fight Einen, and you're fighting Einen, and then I was like, imagine if there's more after Einen, who's the big bad in the movie, of course. And there was! Like, you kill him, and then after that there was this crazy big, like, tentacle monster dragon. And I'm like, okay, this game's good. That's my review of the game.
Obviously, we had this kind of the leap to just Xbox 360 and PS3, where licensed titles we saw this decline. Most of the ones we saw were kind of Marvel-based movies, like Thor, Iron Man, which were both like slagged off by the critics. There was a Green Lantern game, which I thought was pretty good. I do own that still. And Captain America, the first Avenger, which basically just copies the engine from the Batman Arkham games, which are some of the best kind of licensed games based on a comic book property. But it's weirdly, that the Aliens games are sort of stuck around, even though they're not particularly brilliant, with like Colonial Marines, which was an awful game. But we had the great Alien Isolation, which is one of the best, in my opinion, of this kind of movie titles. But I think both of you have probably experienced some of the licensed games on mobile devices. More so, I would say, Macaw, because you've done quite a few streams playing these kind of hidden gems, haven't you?
Indeed, I have. And that was a pretty fascinating world to discover, because a lot of those games, they were like around 2000. Most of the ones that I've played, they were from 2005 to about 2013. Even that late, they were still making button phone games for the Java systems. When those were coming out, I completely ignored them, like, in the day that they were coming out. I'm just like, who cares about this stuff? And then when I went back and started emulating a lot of that stuff, especially, mostly just the stuff that was produced by the company Gameloft, which they got all kinds of licenses, Die Hard 4, Die Hard 5, Wrath of the Titans, the Marvel movies, all this kind of stuff. And they made these absolutely insane 2D side-scrolling games based on all these games that were, for the most part, they're all developed in China. They're Chinese teams. They've all got this incredible pixel art style, gameplay that's designed, of course, around the very limited functionality, but the gameplay is very, very crazy, and a lot of them, it's hard to describe. I describe them myself as acrobatic platformers, because it's non-stop, like, set pieces of you jumping around, doing all these kind of crazy things, which is, even though they're 2D side-scrollers, they're very different because of that to the 16-bit stuff. They're all really crazy, and I believe that whole acrobatic platforming engine that they had actually evolved out of their mobile Prince of Persia games, based on the newer Prince of Persia games at the time. They started with those, and then that led into all these movie licenses where they use the same engine to make these really crazy games. And it's very much an unsung world where if people see a lot of those games, they'll probably be like, whoa, like, in particular, I remember the Die Hard 5 game, A Good Day to Die Hard, is just phenomenal. It's just really clever, just exciting game. You're like, it's constantly switching between the two main characters, Bruce Willis and his son, or whoever it is. I remember sleeping through that movie, so I don't remember much of the movie, but you switch between them in real time, like when the game decides it's time at these cinematic moments, and the whole game comes off as this set piece with you just constantly doing crazy action hero stuff. Grabbing dudes by the head and smashing them into water coolers and stuff, like, and it's a 2D side scroller. They're really fascinating games, really impressive stuff.
It's kind of like the old 16-bit games have sort of had a new lease of life, really, on these mobile devices.
And no one really paid attention because there were only very specific markets that were still buying that stuff at the time.
Because I completely ignored them, because when I had reviewed movies, I mentioned video games, of course, and the mobile ones always went under the radar, because I always thought that most people didn't really care about them, or just saw them as kind of shareware kind of junk.
These had entirely passed me by. I knew they existed sort of tangentially, but that was it. And it was only Macaw streaming them that sort of showed me, actually, a lot of these were really good. And although not based on movies, I remember being really impressed by the Assassin's Creed mobile versions. Just like,
there's so many of them as well. They made a ton.
They seem to get almost like better each time as well.
Oh yeah, the Assassin's Creed 3, the mobile game, which I believe was 2013 as well.
Wow.
That was just a phenomenal game. It's just you watching it, and it's just like, this is amazing. It's for a mobile game. Exactly the same sort of reaction to when. I mean, if you came to me in 2013 and said, you're playing all your retro stuff, but you know that if you get a mobile phone and a button Java mobile phone, and you get the Good Day to Die Hard game on it, that's the most fun you're gonna have in a 2D game these days. I would have never believed you, obviously. Like, I would have been like, what? I'm not even gonna bother looking that up. And then I play the damn thing. And, like, you're sitting there sliding down a skyscraper while shooting at a helicopter, and I'm just like, this is amazing.
I know it's quite difficult to emulate those games, though, isn't it? That's the problem.
Oh, I couldn't get the sound working on the Robocop one at all, but as Macaw has now informed me, you want to be running it through an Android thing like BlueStacks or something, because the Android emulator is the one.
Yeah, that's what you want. And you play the games with the numpad, and that's the way to go.
So finally, chaps, okay, what are the worst licensed games you've ever played?
Oh, right. Highlander's up there. That may be the very worst, actually, or the Spectrum version at least. I don't know why I said that, because, well, the C64 version looks 1,000 times better. It still plays the same, so death to all versions of Highlander, frankly. You've got that absolute shitstorm of a month, as we mentioned earlier, on the Amiga, where you've got their abysmal Last Action Hero Arnie dancing simulator, their version of Dracula, which is a mess, that Akira game, which is no fun whatsoever, and the Cliffhanger game, I would have said is probably the best out of them, because while it's awful, you can at least have a bit of fun with it, whereas the others, no chance. Fight Club on the Xbox is a game that was so forgettable. I played it and totally forgotten I'd played it until I was talking to a friend, so I must try that. And he's like, we spent an afternoon on that, don't you remember? I'm like, nope. That is set off nothing in my memory whatsoever. It didn't sort of fire off a single synapse the whole time we were playing it. Surf Ninjas on the CD32, and I think other Amiga versions. That is pretty bad as well.
That is bad. I think Macaw's played that as well.
I haven't played that version. I've only played the DOS version, which I actually have some fun out of, but that's an updated version of the game. It's quite different.
This is one of those games where you get punished for actually fighting in a game about ninjas. You just have to walk past everyone.
You walk past everyone. It's pointless.
Walk up to an old man and he says, you can't walk past me till you've given me a small crate. So you have to go off and find it. It's just like so forced missions, And actually, going back to what you were saying about Dragonheart having weirdly gory stuff for a family film, Surf Ninjas being a kids' film, it's got like fatalities in it, like loads of bloody fatalities. Like,
what?
Isn't this aimed at like 7-year-olds?
Yeah, that's in the Amiga version, and then in the DOS version, they actually took all that stuff out. The DOS version's more faithful.
It makes a lot more sense because nothing is it. I remember quite hating the Live and Let Die, which is like a sort of speedboat game where you just drive into the screen constantly, like Outrun with boats. And I don't think it's that bad a game, but it really rubbed me up the wrong way when I played it. I just remember being very sort of annoyed by it. I remember hating Karate Kid Part 2 when I first bought it for the Atari ST. I don't know why. So I went back to it later and it was fine, but I think I'd just spent about...
It looks fine. The sprites are tiny, there's a little Karate Kid man, and then the bonus stages are quite cool because they're really well animated.
Yes.
Chop the ice.
I remember all the characters kind of look the same, don't they? Just in different coloured gi.
That's right.
I just remember mostly being annoyed by getting to right the end of the game, and Mr. Miyagi does his weird drum thing. It's like you have to time it, and I didn't understand what you had to do, so I don't think I could ever actually finish the game, because you would beat the last boss, then it's drum thing for the final kick. I don't know what I've got to do. I've died now. Great. Thanks. Brilliant. Every time. And you had to play through the whole game to practice that bit again. But it wasn't bad overall. I think I was just annoyed that I'd spent about £8 on it, and I don't know, it didn't feel like it was worth the money,
Well, this is a hard question for me to answer, because a lot of the time when you're playing a game that's just so terrible, but then secretly there's something really entertaining in it, I mean, Dirty Harry on the NES is terrible, but I still got some enjoyment. There's still some sort of fragments of interesting enjoyment in that game. Beverly Hills Cop on the Amiga is terrible. It's got a lot of other versions as well. But it's entertaining to watch, I guess you could say. Like, it's got aspects to it. But one game I can definitely say that's just baffling. It's absolutely baffling. Is the Rocketeer. The Rocketeer. Not
on the SNES.
The Super Nintendo version is the Super Nintendo version is based on the DOS version, I believe, which is a totally different game to the NES version. I'm not sure if there's a Game Boy one, but Super Nintendo DOS Rocketeer is just mind blowing that they actually made the game like that. So the game starts off with the plane race or whatever it is, where they're going around the arena. And if you look at screenshots of that, or you see it in motion, you think, it's a Rocketeer game, it looks kind of impressive, the graphics. But then you realize if you're playing it, the gameplay has nothing to do with 99% of what you're seeing on the screen with the elaborate animation of them going around. It's actually this tiny thumbnail at the bottom, in the middle at the bottom. There's this tiny thumbnail, and that's what you're controlling, and that's what you're looking at to play the game. So if you see screenshots of that, and that's what the game is. You're looking at this tiny little ship in this thumbnail, and you're not seeing all the good graphics in the scene. And it's just like, what is the point of making the game like this? And it is a multi-genre thing. So when you finish that scene, it then goes on to like horizontal sort of shooting scenes and all this. But they're terrible as well. Like they look like they're made in like BASIC or something, like a video game creator drag and drop system. Like, they're so terrible. It's really just, and that's a Disney produced game. There was a lot of production that went into the DOS version with the sound and the voice acting and stuff, but the game is just baffling, amazingly bad game. So let's definitely say that one.
Some of the worst I've played is certainly Red Heat on the Amiga.
Oh, the screenshots of those. I remember seeing him in an advert. It was like, my God, can a video game look this good? And then you play it and you're like, oh, well, it can look this good, but yes.
It's in glorious widescreen as well, you know. It's, it was just so repetitive and just hilarious at the same time. I just think Ocean shouldn't have really spent the money on purchasing that license.
A better license than Cool World, at least.
Oh my
God. True. Yeah, Cool World. That was. I never properly played that. I always through other people. They said, "Don't play that game. It's awful." You know, the SNES one in particular is just like dog shit. Time Cop on the SNES, I played, and I also loved the movie. There's a video game coming out. Fucking yes. And then playing it was just, what is this? You know, it's a really poorly designed platformer with obviously probably some stunt double of Van Damme's just doing these silly kicks, and villains who just seem like scientists. You're just beating up scientists at some of the levels. I think it was more kind of based on the comic book and then the actual movie. No Escape on the Mega Drive, which is based on that Ray Liotta movie. That is an awful game. Kind of interesting element to it where you can select the maps you want to go to, because you're obviously stuck on this island, so you've got to go to different sections to talk to people, which makes it a little bit kind of different. But once you get into the standard platforming sections, it's really poorly thought out. And I suppose on a modern system, it will probably be Fight Club, which Stuart had mentioned. I did play a bit of The Mummy on the PlayStation. It's got the whole score from the film by Jerry Goldsmith, and it's wonderful. But once you're playing it, it's another one of those games where it's like a third-person kind of Tomb Raider style game in this very clunky engine. Which makes it very forgettable. But I think there's obviously probably a lot more licensed titles which we've forgotten about or haven't mentioned, like on the PS2, like things like Little Britain and Family Guy. There was The Mummy Returns video game, which is awful. It's kind of like cheap games they kind of threw out. They just slapped on this kind of movie kind of title license, and people still fell for it. And in the case like Robocop, that came out by Titus, which was not really based on a movie, a particular movie, but it was, again, a game that everyone was kind of excited for, and it was an absolute stinker. Thankfully, like in the case of Terminator, like Terminator Resistance, which came out about 2 years ago, I think it's a really good game, clearly made by fans of the property, and I think they are doing a Robocop game as well, the same developers, so fingers crossed that is a good game.
It just reminded me the Terminator game on DOS. That's a weird thing, isn't it? That's something I have to watch on YouTube every couple of years to remind myself that existed. Yeah. It's so strange.
Yeah, it's really interesting because that was the first one that Bethesda made. Bethesda did, I think, 5 on DOS? 5 Terminator games, and the first one is actually the most ambitious one because it's a completely open world game based on Terminator 1 where you can pick either Kyle or the Terminator, and if you're Kyle you have to protect Sarah, and if you're the Terminator you kill Sarah, and it's an open world, and it's unbelievably ambitious for 1991, whenever that came out. As they did the subsequent Terminator games, they more focused on different areas. Like one of them was like a dungeon crawler, almost you could call it. One of them was like a Doom clone. But yeah, that first one is kind of the most ambitious one, open world. It's hard to play these days, but it is very ambitious for its time.
What are the best licensed titles you've played?
I'm going to briefly go back to the worst because I've just remembered I own Batman and Robin for the Gamecom. So if I don't mention that as one of the worst, there'll be something wrong. Well, I presume it's one of the worst. It's the Gamecom, so I couldn't see the screen.
True.
I mean, the best, for me, I think it's always going to be Robocop on the Spectrum, but that's partially because of when it came out and how much I love Robocop. So that's always going to be something for me, that bloody Ghostbusters game will always have a place in my heart where it doesn't deserve to be. But it was Ghostbusters, and it has the music. Well, a version of the music. A terrible version of the music. Ray Parker Jr. actually coming in your house and slapping it off. The sheer insult of it. You know? As weird as it sounds, the Running Man on the Spectrum has a place in my heart as well, because I wrote tips for it for a magazine, which has got to be one of the most redundant things ever because it's such an easy game. Of course, they didn't print it, but that was like one of my first forays into trying to speak to other people officially about video games, you know. But yeah, for me, I think it is always going to be Robocop on the Spectrum. It's a bit like when you ask a film critic what their favourite film is, and they always have a prepared answer, and it's always something that meant something to them at the time. And I think that might be that for me, actually. Yeah.
For really standout movie games for me, I'd definitely say, moving through time here in chronological order, I guess that 16-bit Atari ST version of Masters of the Universe really still sticks out to me as being really cool. Then, of course, the Batman games on NES. Of course, has to have a mention as well. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves on the NES is a remarkably good game, which I really, really, really like that game. It's actually really, really good. Combination of top-down action RPG with side-view fighting game battles, with zoomed-out army battles, with horse riding scenes. It's just... It's got a lot to it. It's very fun to play. I think that's a really good one. On the Game Boy, actually, on Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Color version of Blade is phenomenal to me. Like, that game is amazing. It's actually the people responsible for that. It's a Japanese developed game. They're the same teams that worked on, or a lot of the same people that worked on Double Dragon 1 and Double Dragon 2, including the creator of Double Dragon, I believe. They all worked on that on that Blade game on Game Boy Color, which was with a company called Avit at the time, being published by HAL, and it's really good. It's got some tough moments with the sword fighting bosses, but the rest, it's you can tell that it's the Double Dragon guys because the proportions on the sprites and everything, and it's got a really in-depth moveset. It's a really fleshed out and really, really fun game. You've got really standout stuff from later in the 3D era, like the Riddick game. Of course, I played a lot of the Riddick games, so I definitely have to say that as well.
Well, for me, it's going to be, like Stuart, sort of nostalgic-wise, it's going to be Batman on the C64. You know, I didn't own the Amiga version or the NES one. I played them, but I always stuck to the Commodore version. And then there was Terminator on the Mega CD I thought was brilliant. Fantastic music, and it stays very close to the movie and its plot, where the Mega Drive version was like, as soon as you get past the first level, the game is insanely easy. Basically, you complete it in about 15 minutes. I remember being disappointed because I traded in, was it Two Crude Dudes on the Mega Drive for the Terminator, and Two Crude Dudes was a lot of fun, and it was quite it wasn't a short game, but getting the Terminator, just completed it in 15 minutes. I was like, I felt gutted because it's wasted my money, or so to speak. And then there was probably Batman Returns was great on the SNES. I love playing that. I love side-scrolling beat 'em ups. You can throw people into the back walls, on the benches.
That's so fun, that game.
That's a great getting their heads together and going and smashing them. It was good. It was a good laugh. I still get a lot of fun out of Jurassic Park on the Mega Drive, despite people sort of not liking it in later years. Probably finally, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, Alien Isolation, because it still scares the shit out of me playing that game, and it's like really fucking long. It's not like back in the days of the Ocean titles, you could complete them in like 20 minutes, and you spent like £10 on that game. You think, oh bollocks, or they make it the game, because the game's so short, they artificially make it really difficult, so you just struggle. Like Ghostbusters 2 on the Amstrad Speccy, and even the Amiga, like 3 fucking levels, 3 levels, and you can't get past like the second level where you're like, with the Statue of Liberty. It's just so hard.
So what do you think is the weirdest film to ever get a movie adaptation? Just a film that you think, well, this isn't going to sell. Why does this even exist?
That's a good question.
There's that weird Robin Williams Toys film had a game, didn't it?
Yes. Good one, Stuart.
All I remember is it was
bizarre.
Hard and boring. That's all I can tell you. Which is not particularly useful.
Because there was bizarre ones, wasn't there? Like EastEnders and Neighbours had video games.
Oh god, yeah, all the TV stuff
on the old speckies.
Yeah, every
TV stuff.
Alf Wiedersehen Pet, which is like a British sitcom about builders, and the game is unbelievably bad, actually. But for movies, I feel like there's got to be some really ridiculous... Oh, I suppose if we take into account the DS, though, that had pretty much everything, didn't it?
It did.
You had, like, Mean Girls game for it and stuff like that, didn't you? Maybe...
There was odd ones like the Hunt for Red October, which is kind of a weird... Yes. I mean, I suppose it could have been a good game, but it's just a bizarre sort of translation of it.
Yeah, Hunt for Red October, that's actually got... I've only finished the DOS one, which is absolutely terrible. But they're all slightly different. Like the Amiga one is like the DOS one with different graphics. There's a NES one that has a platforming scene at the end. There's a Super Nintendo one where you're in the submarine fighting a gigantic squid as one of the bosses. It's just bizarre. Like, yeah, I gotta try to play those games more someday. But I think they're probably mostly bad.
Well, we could ponder the idea of movies that didn't get video games that should have.
Oh, that's interesting.
I would like to have had perhaps a video game based on... I suppose we did get one with the Turrican knockoff game with like Universal Soldier, but it would have been good to have a Universal Soldier proper video game.
One, yeah.
I think I would like to play that as a kid, where you could have had a choice between playing as Van Damme or Dolph Lundgren, and it's like a totally different storyline or like series of levels. Sort of create some sort of repeat value to it, sort of make you go back to it.
I definitely have an answer to this, because going through, especially all the Amiga stuff, there's some cool stuff and games that are bad, but it's cool that there was a game based on that movie just for the sake of interest and whatnot. But the one that I really would have liked, for some bizarre reason, it just kept coming to my head, especially with the way Amiga games are a lot of the times, even if they're terrible, was a split-second game with Rutger Hauer. If I could just have...
amazing!
If I could have an Amiga split-second game where you play a really big Rutger Hauer sprite who controls very clunky, it would probably be better. Fighting an alien in the city while you're gunning down... I get visions in my head.
Eat chocolates.
Yeah. For power, yeah. I kind of get a vision in my head of like that stage we were talking about before in the Terminator 2 game where you're just walking while shooting. If something
It
very
needs to look like Sword of Sodan with massive sprites,
Exactly.
not much animation.
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily need to be a good game, but at the same time, I'm being legitimate with saying I would thoroughly enjoy, even if it was a bad game, if it was just with that theme, with like good graphics, even if it's clunky, that would have been really cool, because that movie, it's not the best movie, but for being adapted into a game at that period as a 2D side-scroll, it would have been perfect, so...
So they released things like Suburban Commando, didn't
Yeah.
they?
Oh,
Yeah.
my God, I'd forgotten that. That was a budget game, if I remember. God. Yeah, especially because, your license was probably so expensive. Maybe I'm wrong and it wasn't a budget game whatsoever. Please abuse me in the comments, everyone. Commando with Arnie. There's no game of that I know of. I mean, it had action figures, but no game. How did this happen?
There's only the Capcom Commando, which everyone... A lot of people probably still think that Commando from Capcom is based on the movie, but it's got nothing to do with the movie.
No, absolutely. Mind you, the game would probably be identical, to be fair. You just throw more lawnmower blades than you do in that game. I'd like to see one. This would have to be like an Xbox era one, based on Stone Cold, the Brian Bosworth film, which is pretty mental.
Oh my God.
I would love to see some weird adaptation of that, where nothing quite makes sense. Going back, Doll Man, the full moon weird thing where there's an alien detective, but he's really small. Just because it would be fun to have, levels where you're some sort of superhero with a gun type thing, but you're only like 12 inches tall. So all the backgrounds would be like crazy and giant versions of everything. And recently, I mean, they did a film of Moonwalker, didn't they? Which is a weird music film. Why haven't we got a game based on Cats? The recent Cats musical, where you just go along with a hammer hitting the bloody things, and they already look like they've escaped from a bloody Xbox game, so you're halfway there,
I suppose like in the Commando game, you have like a bonus round where you've got to put the ice cream in his daughter's face. You've got to wiggle the joystick. You're like, come on!
Like Karate Kid 2, where you've got to catch the fly with the chopsticks. It's just like flying around the screen, like a darts game or something.
I forgot about that.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for taking part, and I'm sure there'll be many people in the comments sort of listing out some of their suggestions for games that are for movies that should have had video games, or ones that we've derided they adore. But
the Surf Ninjas fans will be coming out of the woodwork. Yeah.
I think Macaw will probably get more heat for enjoying some utter schlock, but
Hey, that Dragonheart game, Surf Ninjas quality game.